England, looking at raw materials for minerals for projects and networks. So over to you, Karen. And can you start the timer?
Oh, don't start it. Thank you very much. I can safely say now that we are going to change gears and talk about something completely different. So we will talk a little bit about minerals. I'm actually no longer at the Geological Survey of Denmark and Greenland. I'm at something called EIT Raw Materials. I'll say a little bit about what that is. It's a sort of pan-European partnership. But then I will wave my arms a little bit about minerals and what they might mean for energy technologies and how we should think about minerals and co-think minerals and energy perhaps in the future, both in the short term, but certainly also in the longer term. But I am mostly going to sort of be quite general and wave my arms a little bit and throw some ideas and some definitions and non-definitions out there. And then tomorrow, there's going to be 3 talks that follow up on the minerals thing that will be, I think, digging quite a bit deeper into the subject. So, minerals. Why are minerals? Our first sort of just places sort of on the European. I know it's potentially very controversial to talk about Europe right at the moment, but the sort of European context of why we have this so high on the agenda in Europe right now, and actually also globally. But if you look at this figure here, it's one of my sort of favorite figures. It shows the global proportion, approximately, of primary metals and minerals produced in different regions of the world. It goes back to 1850. We have Europe here in blue. And as you can see, you go back 150 years, Europe was the main mining region in the world. Then in around 1900, Europe gets overtaken by the United States, and then up sort of through the World War years, and then from 1970, the US is also overtaken by a lot of other regions. You can see them up here. You have China, former Soviet, Australia and Canada, and then we have lumped together sort of 6 different countries here. This is from the Raw Materials Group, and a version of this has also been put in the European Commission's scoreboard for raw materials. So basically, we're looking at Europe here today. It's in blue. And so today we are down to contributing something like maybe 2 to 5% of the global production of metals and minerals. One of the issues with that is, of course, that during these years here, we established a lot of industry in Europe of various sorts that used metals in the production. And these industries still exist in Europe, and they still actually need metals to function. And this is also from the scoreboard. So this is a joint research center. And here you can sort of see, if you look at mining and metals in Europe in terms of revenue and jobs, it's not that impressive. It would look differently if we also put aggregates on here, sand and gravel and those things. But if you just look at the metals, and it looks like this. But if you look at the downstream processing and manufacturing of metals, then it is greater revenue, more jobs. And then when you look at the manufacturing industries of Europe, and these are the car manufacturers, this is the Airbus, this is all of these companies that do not see themselves as raw materials companies, but actually need all of this. And we can sort of superimpose on here any kind of industry, any kind of value chain that we'd like to look at. And today, of course, we want to look at this one here, the energy value chain. How does that fit in to the minerals sector? And this is another picture that sort of shows this. This is what we want to do. We want to transition from a brown economy into a green economy. We want to do it not only in Europe, but in Europe we'd like to take lead on this. And we have a lot of industry that supports this, but we actually want to do this almost on a global level, and we want to enable that. And of course, this means that we need some new energy technologies. And we've heard a lot about some of them today, and we call them renewables because there's enough of the sun out there, we just heard, and there's also enough of the wind to do everything, but we need more than the sun and the wind. We actually also need to construct the devices that will convert this energy into something that is useful, and we need the storage and the transportation of the energy that we produce. So we can see here solar and windmills. That's what we want. We want to get rid of what goes on over here, sort of pretty much. These are some of the minerals that we need for this transition. We still need lots of other minerals for lots of other things, and we also need other minerals to transport energy and store energy. But this is the sort of very critical ones. There's cobalt, lithium, platinum, rare earth elements, and I know we'll hear about some of them tomorrow, and I also know there's a great poster out there about cobalt today. So those are some of the minerals that we might use. in Europe. And this is what it looks like for Europe now. So 2 to 5% of the global production. At the same time, we are consuming, as far as we can count, it's difficult to count these things, but as far as we can count, we are consuming or using maybe 25, maybe 30% of the mineral resources globally. And that means we need to import them. And here you can see the ones I just mentioned. There's cobalt, there's platinum, rare earth elements. Import dependency 100% for our industries. If you look at some of the more sort of pedestrian ones, we have manganese, iron, zinc, and copper, the ones that we actually produce, we still need to import more than 50% of those. So this puts Europe sort of in a bit of a bind. This has led Europe to take sort of a number of initiatives over the last decade or so, and it started probably with the rare earth crisis about 10 years ago, which really was great for geologists that work with minerals, because that finally sort of got the attention of decision makers and people funding research and innovation. So you can see if we go all the way back to Framework Program 5 and 6, there was almost nothing going on that was relevant for minerals and metals in terms of research on a European level. Then we had the European Technology Platform for Sustainable Raw Materials was founded, and this was sort of a lobbying organization that really tried to talk directly in Brussels and get this on the agenda, and they were quite successful. The European Commission launched the EU Raw Materials Initiative, which is the mineral strategy for Europe. They launched the ARAMIN project, which is a collaboration from a lot of national research funders. Then they launched the European Innovation Partnership on Raw Materials, which is a high-level group directly advising the Commission on all things raw materials. Then under Horizon 2020, there's the Societal Challenges 5 funding, and here more than 600 million euros was allocated specifically for raw materials research. After that, EIT, European Institute of Innovation and Technology, raw materials was funded. This is the organization I come from, and I'll just give a couple of slides about who we are and what we do. The EIT raw materials kick. Then we have the circular economy package coming out a year or two later, also again with a big raw materials component in it. And finally, the Battery Alliance, with the first time you could say the Commission has gone out with a challenge-based initiative trying to look at the entire value chain. I'll return to that and say a little bit more about it. So just very briefly, what is the institution I work for? The European Institute of Innovation and Technology is an agency under the European Commission, and they fund so-called KICs, Knowledge and Innovation Communities. These are partnerships consisting of research organizations, universities, and industries. The idea being that you integrate that, we call that the knowledge triangle, and then some beautiful innovation happens. So it's not research per se, it's supposed to build on research and take it closer to the market. And basically, right now, we have 8 different KICs with different subject areas. Mine is the raw materials one, but there's actually also one that's called KIC Energy that looks very specifically on energy technologies. There's one on climate, there's one on food, there's one on health. And just now, in December of this year, 2 new ones were added in, one on urban mobility, which also has a big raw materials component, of course, and one on manufacturing that also has a big raw materials component. Our KIC, EIT Raw Materials, vision to develop raw materials into a major strength for Europe, and basically to enable sustainable competitiveness of the European minerals, metals, and materials sector along the value chain by driving innovation, education, and entrepreneurship to secure raw material supply, design material solution, and close material loops. This is very, very similar to the raw materials initiative from the Commission. We're all on the same page. We all have the same ambition, more or less, of what we want to do. This is our partnership. We have 126 core and associate partners, more than 190 project partners that are just involved in one single project. And this is basically our geographical spread in Europe. We do not have a lot of UK partners, but we do have some. And we have a headquarter in Berlin, which is where I'm based, and then we have 6 regional offices shown here in blue, and then we have some regional centers as well. So we have a really pretty good geographical reach for our partnership. And what we basically do is that I'm not going to dwell on this, but I think we'll share the presentations afterwards. We do 3 types of activities. We do matchmaking and networking, sort of like this. We do acceleration. This is the, you could say, what builds on the R&D. These are innovation projects that are meant to bring technologies closer to the market, and it's also startups that we can fund. And then we do the Raw Materials Academy, we do education, we do higher education, we do professional learning, and we also do wider society learning, so sort of awareness and also school kids. Transversally here, we do lighthouses. These are challenges that we'd like to address. We work together with the other KICs, and we try to also reach out specifically to certain parts of Europe where maybe innovation potential needs a little extra. The scope. So when we say we work along the entire value chain, then we basically mean something like this. I mean, the value chain starts with exploration. It actually starts with mineral resource assessment, knowing where to go and look for minerals. Then we have mining, we have processing, oftentimes many steps here. Then we have a more advanced material that we had back here, and we're putting it into products and designs. We're looking at substitution. We're looking at recycling, and finally we're looking at the sort of overarching value chain here, it's what you could call the circular economy. And there was a reference to the circular economy earlier this morning, that this is sort of the solution that everyone is calling for the challenges that we're facing, not just in Europe, but globally. We need to move towards a circular economy. And I totally agree with this, and I want to say this is our version of the circular economy. It's really the whole value chain, getting stuff into it. It's waste all along the value chain, lots of leakages. And so you could sort of say the idea is get things in here in a good way, keep material in here for as long as possible, and recycle and minimize waste as much as you can, and find good methodologies for recycling. Of course, there's sort of around this, there's going to be a whole energy loop as well, of energy that goes into this. Partly you can use this to talk about energy technologies over here, but also, of course, a lot of energy consumption goes into these initial steps of the value chain. So there's two ways that energy becomes important here. So circular economy, I can't sort of resist this slide. Here's my new favorite slide. There's actually a publication out, maybe if I just remove I can't remove the arrow here. There was a paper that came out in 2017. It's called Conceptualizing the Circular Economy, an analysis of 114 definitions. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. This is an actual publication. I'm sure it's a great publication, but it has, of course, a 115th definition towards the end of it. And so when we talk about circular economy, there's a little bit this tendency, and this is, I cut a little bit too quick on this, there's a little bit of tendency that we put a green circle onto stuff, and then we say the word sustainable, or maybe we will also say responsible, and then everyone thinks it's a good idea. I think it's really great. So circular economy has sort of become this mantra that everyone talks about. And one of the cases I really want to make here today is that circular economy is something that is way too important to leave to economists. This is something we all have to get in there, and we have to talk about the materials, we have to talk about the energy, and we certainly have to talk about why it doesn't look like a green circle that's completely closed, because it doesn't. And I'll talk a little bit about this. This is a good example, and this is actually, I know that there's people out there that can read Norwegian. This is actually from the Danish advisory board to the Danish government. The Danish government, like everyone else, wants to be first movers on the circular economy. So they had an advisory board consisting of economists sit down and tell them how to do that. And this is what they came up with. And it is a really good example of a terrible conceptualization of circular economy. You have an apple core. I can make fun of the Danes because I'm Danish. So you have an apple core here, it's kind of turning into bricks, and then it becomes a light bulb, and then stuff goes on here. And there's nothing ever that really comes into the loop other than here. And it is literally a green circle that's completely closed, that there's a smacking on here, because then we're all for it. Then we think it's a really good idea. So that's what's happening there. I have no idea what it actually means. I just know this does not make sense. And if we talk about material flow this way, we'll never solve the challenges that we might have. And there are reasons for that, and I'll just very, very briefly touch on some of them. One of them is this one. It's the world population. It's going up. We're more and more people. We all want stuff. We want the refrigerators, we want cars, we want computers. This is something that the material flow has to deal with. More importantly, not only are we more people, we're twice as many people as we were only, 30, 40 years ago. We are using more raw materials, minerals, metals per person. So here you can see normalized, this is from Thomas Gradle from Yale University. We're normalizing here our consumption or our use of metals per person to 1 in the year 1900. And it's a logarithmic scale. So what we see out here is that we use 1,000 times as much aluminium. we use 100 times as much chromium, 50 times as much nickel, and even again, if you look at the pedestrian ones, copper, zinc, iron, we use somewhere between 5 and 10 times as much as we did. Plus, we are many, many more people. So we basically have a growing demand for metals and minerals that we have to acknowledge and we have to deal with. That doesn't mean we can't talk about other things we don't need. Could we cut back on this? Maybe we could, but that is something we have to face in a realistic and pragmatic way. Because again, this is about people in other parts of the world entering into a middle class, wanting a computer, just like we do. Another thing that's very important for the circular economy argument, or how we can think about circular economy, is this one here. The consumption or the use of mineral raw materials, how it's changed historically. And this is also one of my favorite figures. It's an original source here, but this is also in this scoreboard from the European Commission. And you could actually, you could put this one all the way back to the Stone Age and say we had one raw material, and it was flint, and then we became slightly more advanced with time. As you can see here, as technologies became more advanced, we're using more and more different things. And today, some of the technologies that we want and like, and actually some of the technologies that are related to energy production, we need this. And I know that there are some geologists in the room, and we all know that you're not going to find a rock that's going to look like this. This means mining in 20 different locations, perhaps. So this is the reality, and the reality is also, and this is actually very important, that many of these, we didn't use them 50 years ago. This is stuff that we are using today that we didn't use recently, so what are we going to recycle? We didn't use it. We don't have products that they're in. And that leads me to this one. As long as we are using things, we can't recycle them. They have a residence time, so the house that I'm living in is going to be sitting there for 100 years maybe. It's not going to get recycled until 100 years from today. The wind turbines that we're putting up today, they are designed to last for maybe 50 or 60 years. So that's 50 and 60 years down the road that we can maybe recycle it. And if you go back 50 years, we didn't have wind turbines. So the neodymium that we want to put into our wind turbines today, there is no recycle source. These are metals where we really truly have an increasing demand, and we cannot cover them from recycling. So this is an example of recycling in it's not a very attractive plot, but it brings back the message. This is sort of a theoretical case saying if you have an 8% annual increase in demand, which is not unrealistic for many elements. There might be some where we are almost constant, but there are also some where we're talking tens of percents. If you, after 1 year, years out of this axis here, if you after 1 year, theoretically, if you could recycle it 100%, you get everything out of this thing that you're recycling. You're only using it for 1 year, but demand has gone up by 8%. So after 1 year, you could, in principle, get 92% of what you need from this. This is not rocket science. But the reality is, again, you want to maybe use your gadget for a few more years, and if you do go just 10 years into it, then you can only cover something like 60-70%. I'm getting close, okay. You can see here for different scenarios, this is 100%, this is 70, this is 40, and this is 10%, and this is perhaps a little bit more realistic, because when you look at recycling, we think that we have some material, we want to now recycle and put it into a loop, but there's stuff that goes off to the side. It's a sort of dissemination, fireworks, fertilizers, there are things that are just lost. Then there's stuff that we could maybe potentially recycle and stuff that we can't. This is these two colors here. So if we don't have the technology to recycle it, we're not going to recycle it. The stuff that's potentially recyclable, you all have it sitting at home in your disk drawer. Sometimes we recycle it, sometimes we don't. So in reality, it sort of looks like this. We're recycling perhaps this much. Of course, this is done by material scientists, not by geologists, but you actually have to remember that even before this step here, there's a place where we're wasting things off to the side because there's mining waste. That's the first thing that goes off to the side. So this is the reality of things. And this is basically Thomas Gradel's group at Yale. And they did this for the entire periodic table. And I think 2019 is the year of the periodic table. They looked at what can we recycle. You can see the colors again here. What is potentially recyclable with the technologies we have and what is not for a variety of elements. As you can see here, Here's we have copper, we have silver. Here we have the technologies to do this. We know how to do it. And even for the rare earths, it's not as bad as you'd think. It's not great for some of them. Here you can't recycle these, but for this neodymium sitting here, potentially we have the technologies to recycle it. Very well. The reality looks like this. This is a few years old, and we should probably update it, but this is from UNEP. This is how much neodymium we're recycling, less than 1%. So the reality of the recycling is that we're not using all of it. So I want to go back to this one. This is how we should think about it. We must get things into the loop in the first place. Whether we can get things into the loop now that we can recycle 50 years down the road, that's great. But we need to get things into the loop. We need to keep them in the loop for as long as possible. That means we have to make houses and cars and telephones last longer. It takes longer before we can recycle them. But it also means we should design them so that we can actually recycle them when the time comes. And this, I think, is a very important thing. These guys, it's all about the value chain integration. Talking to these guys here who do not see themselves as metal companies, but they are using the metals. If we can get them to care about the sourcing and the recycling, then we actually have a chance of doing something that will be more sustainable. And I have a couple of just very quick examples that has to do with energy. And now I'm back to my own sort of neck of the woods. These are our partners. These are our industry partners that are interested in battery technologies. And we sort of plotted them into this value chain, looking at, do we have everyone we need in here? And we don't actually, these are typically not core partners, but they're interested in working on projects with us because they're the cell manufacturers and they want to know about the sourcing now, and we have those partners, and they also want to talk to Veolia and Umicore and Relight about how can we maybe recycle these products when they come down the road. These are the projects that we're currently running in our partnership. We have 9 upscaling projects, so these are innovation projects trying to get things towards the market. As you can see here, we are really focused on the exploration, the mining or the extraction, the processing and the recycling. That is the expertise of the partnership that we have. But again, we're trying to talk to these guys so we can get it right. And we have a couple of other projects on education and internationalization where we try to do a little bit of the same thing. So one last message. I think I have half a minute left, maybe. So I like this figure. I think you all know that now. But the title changed on this one. I think a really, really important thing about the circular economy is that it's not the goal in itself. It's not, we shouldn't sort of say, we need to completely close the loop because it's never going to happen and we're going to get a circular economy. I mean, no one has talked about linear economy as being a goal of anything. The circular economy is the means. It's the means for us to get what it is we want. And this is, of course, the ability to actually commit to the Paris Agreement and also deliver on the Paris Agreement and deliver on lots of other things. And so this is not the goal. This is our tool. This is our vehicle for actually addressing the real goals that look like this. And I really think we should remember that, and we should remember that we need to talk to each other to achieve these. And with that, I will say thank you.
Okay, that was great. And fresh take at recycling correctly. So questions for Karen. We've got 5 minutes, I think. Yep.
It's just a comment, really.
Say who you are.
Oh, sorry, I'm Andrew Bloodworth from BGS. Karen and I are all friends. So I'm not going to be too hard on her. Just to make a point really about recycling, one of the biggest issues with recycling, particularly of these sort of technology metals that Karen spoke about, the ones we're using now that we've not used in the past, is we're putting them together in products in combinations that nature doesn't, which makes them incredibly hard to separate out again. So it's something that's not, Julian Allwood at Cambridge also talks about this to do with steel alloys. Almost all steel, we're very good at recycling steel, but almost all steel is downcycled. And that has profound implications for carbon, because the only way you can upcycle that steel again is to mix new virgin steel with it, which of course puts an awful lot of carbon into the atmosphere.
John Midgley, BGS. Before I joined the BGS, I was doing some work on circular economy for United Kingdom utilities. And in our experience, well, in their experience, they found out that as they were trying to put sediments accrued through sewage waste back into the economy, they found out that it used a huge amount of electricity, a huge amount of water, and as you've mentioned, the waste that spins off at each part of the process, as you get closer to putting it back in the circular economy, those wastes become increasingly toxic and hard to deal with. And that was the big challenge they had, and in the end they just canned the project because they couldn't handle the waste.
Yes. No, I think there's a lot of hype about zero waste. And actually there are hardcore people who say that zero waste is a goal of the circular economy. So it's not even just circular economy not being a goal in itself, but it's a zero waste. And of course we should try to minimize waste. And if we can make a waste stream a resource, I think that is totally great. There's no question about that. And there are many relevant places we can talk about with that, with food waste and all kinds of other places. But for instance, as Andrew just pointed out, it is not that simple, because when we make the little steel is one example, but also in these other things, things are mixed to have exact properties, and to unmix them again, you will not be able to do that without putting in an incredible amount of energy, and then it becomes downcycled, and then eventually it will become waste. So yes, waste streams are the hard part, and I think mining waste is one of the ones that people are overlooking all the time.
Exactly. My question was on mining waste, recycling mining waste. There are also regulatory problems. Sometimes this waste is declared as dangerous waste.
Yes.
It has to be disposed securely. So actually, the logical thing would be to mine it again, to do metallurgy on that, but it's often not possible because public opinion is against, because again mining, and because of regulatory problems.
Yes.
Have you done something at the European level on that?
We actually do have a few projects that look at mine waste, but mostly at the moment actually trying to assess it, because this is the other problem that, I'm an exploration geologist originally, and we have York standards, we have standards for how we describe a resource. We have a tonnage and we have a grade, and when it comes to describing these kinds of resources, or for that matter mining waste, we haven't quite done that. So there's actually quite poor understanding of what is potentially there as a resource, and I think that there's certainly parts of Europe where the potential is pretty great. And so we do have some projects where we're trying to start to map that and see, because you're right that it can be controversial to go back in and mine it, but it can actually also be environmental mitigation at the same time as you're creating value. So it could be a win-win if you can find the right types of waste. And again, when it comes to technologies, we talk about taking out 100% of this one and of the steel and upcycling or recycling. But the same goes for when we extract from primary ore. We extract something, but we don't extract everything. And when we go back to mining waste that was maybe processed decades ago, they could potentially be quite rich.
Francis Wall, University of Exeter. Alex King from United States stated a very nice idea a few months ago, pointing out that the tree of life, that life only needs about 17 elements. So why do we need 66 to manufacture a mobile phone? And of course, that is the trend that you just highlighted, that we're using more and more elements. I just wonder whether there is any research going on in the KIC, or that people are talking about, to try and get geologists and manufacturers really talking together, so that the things that occur together in nature, say we do use more together, or we try and simplify and marry up manufacturing better with the raw materials that are at the start.
I think that's a really good question. I don't actually really have an answer for it. I think that is a very, very important conversation. That's why this integration of the value chain is so important, because certainly before that conversation was not really had. But I think that there's a lot of people who, the more advanced and the smaller and the better. We all want batteries that's better than the last battery we have. And that is, of course, the problem. So they're constantly refining to get the exact properties again. So I think that's a very difficult one, but we have to start having that conversation for sure.
Okay. That's good. And that's time up, I think.
Okay.
Thank you very much
Thank you.
for great answers.